It activates synapses in your brain that don't ordinarily work together.
A lot of what I wrote is actually reminiscent of my own experience.
When the story stops talking to you, then you're done. And I'm like, when does that ever happen?
We are the Front Page Pass, brought to you by Word Journeys, the literary world's hottest new podcast. Fellow publishing industry expert and author, illustrator, designer join together in bringing you the latest news, discussions, and literary-related entertainment for readers, writers, and educators alike. All right, so welcome to the Front Page Pass with your hosts, Bob Yelling and Lex Black. We have quite a few things in store today. We're interviewing two interesting guests, Claire Eisenthal and Tanya Brooking. And happy to announce that last week, if you guys have been keeping up with us, you know that last week we aired our very first podcast. And we got a lot of great reviews on it from across the country and even the world, really. I mean, quite a bit. So... and we are now available also on all platforms, so we have a lot in store for you guys. So just stick with us, and we'll see what we can bring to the table. So
yeah, and it was a really good first show, and like you said, we had a lot of good response from people. But we're writers, we're creatives, and we don't sit and rest on our laurels very long. So now we're going right into guest conversations, and of course the novelists Claire Eisenthal and Tanya Brooking will be joining us later. And and I was just thinking about it, getting ready for this interview with them, that our administrative manager at Word Journeys, Aaron James, and I had the pleasure of interviewing Brian Scarry from National Geographic last week. He's the senior producer and executive producer of the show Secrets of Wales, and it was really fun because we went off track off the script right away. And we asked questions about the intricacies of filming whales. For instance, I never knew this, but you cannot go down and film whales underwater with scuba gear because the bubbles freak them out. So these guys managed to get these incredible shots on all these shows we've seen while they're snorkeling and while they're free diving, so holding their breath. So literally they get these great shots when they have maybe 2 minutes to work with because they have to come up for air.
Exactly.
But that was just one of the many things. And so I'm hoping that we can deliver something similar with Claire and Tanya when we speak to them later today. And but first we have a couple of things, and then we'll get right to our guests. And I was thinking, since our podcast is for both readers and writers, I was thinking about a nice little crossover tip that we could offer. And one of the things I love to do when I'm writing novels is cross-read. And cross-reading is really fun, whether you're a reader or a writer. And what cross-reading simply means is reading in different genres at the same time. So for instance, you might have a memoir, a poetry book, a thriller, a mainstream novel, and maybe some kind of nonfiction book. And then you read them all. Everything's bookmarked. Your bedside table stacked up like this, right?
We've all been there.
Yeah, and like for instance, when I'm writing books, I never read in the genre I'm writing while I'm writing. I always do, and I'm not writing the book, but I don't want any bleed through to happen between someone else's voice and my own. But when I'm reading, and I'm just reading, it's like free for all. And one of the greatest things that I learned about cross-reading to enhance us as writers is that neuroscientists did studies on this many years ago, or several years ago, and they showed that if you cross-read, then your brain, it activates synapses in your brain that don't ordinarily work together, and they cross-hatch as well. So cross-reading, cross-hatching the brain synapses. And so what you'll see is when we read books and we see writers that come up with these amazing similes and metaphors that you're just going, how did that writer connect those two things? It just seems so different. Well, one of the reasons is that they cross-read. And through cross-reading, your brain just naturally forms associations and connections between things that aren't otherwise related.
Yeah, that they normally wouldn't.
It's really cool. So whether reading or writing, it's always fun to read 3, 4, 5 books at the same time. And obviously, once you get fully immersed in one of them, you're going to just take off and finish it. But from a writing standpoint, cross-reading is just such a great tool to have in the belt. And I know when I cross-read and then I start writing, it just comes out of anywhere, and you're just fully immersed in the creative process. And so I just wanted to share that quick tip today on cross-reading. And and I mean, you probably have done it with the books you've written too, where you've just reading different genres.
Yes, I have multiple times. Whenever I've been writing on medieval fantasy, which tends to be my go-to, I have often read mystery. I do like reading horror as well, and I feel like that really helps because since I'm intrigued by those genres also, I'm able to kind of incorporate certain aspects that I have from that, because any book you read obviously puts you in a different mindset, so you're kind of you're in that mindset of the book you're reading, but then when you can take it into what you're writing as well, so it's pretty neat. Yeah, and
I know when I was writing Voices, my music novel, it was really hard not to read music books because I love reading about musicians. So what I did is I read both fiction and nonfiction books about visual artists, because what are musicians but artists with musical notes.
Exactly.
And and then plus a lot of poetry, because I was writing a lot of lyrics in the voices of my characters.
Yes.
Sure, because poetry and lyrics are very, very similar.
They are.
All
within the same vein.
Iambic pentameter in poetry is a 4/4 beat in music. It's the same exact rhythm. So so cross reading is just a great technique and a great tool, and
it truly is.
It really, really helps with you in your writing practice. So since we have an abbreviated front part of the show today, since we can't wait to talk to our guests, I wanted to just do our regular thing of about telling everybody about the New York Times bestseller list. And what we do in every show is the top 5 fiction, the top 5 nonfiction, and these bestseller lists that we read are a combined print and ebook sales. So it's not just one or the other; it's both put together. So in fiction, we have kind of a rare thing. The 1 and 2 spots in the New York Times top 5 are both by the same author, Kristen Hanna. Her book, The Four Winds, went number 1 this week, and it's been on the charts for 4 weeks. And then Firefly Lane, her other book, has been on for 6 weeks, and that's number 2. Number 3 is The Kaiser's Web by Steve Barry, which is the 16th book in the Cotton Malone series. Number 4 is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas, and that's her 5th book in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. So 2 series having a lot of play here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then number 5 on the list is The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. How about nonfiction?
Yep, and for the nonfiction, we have number 1 is How to Avoid a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates, which has been on there for 2 weeks. Number 2 is Think Again by Adam Grant, which has been on there for 4 weeks. 3 is Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, which has been on there for 19 weeks. Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, 30 weeks. And then Walk in My Combat Boots is number 5 by James Patterson. And they're all pretty intriguing reads. They really are. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so without further ado, we've been building them up long enough. So our guest today, it's really a pleasure because I've had the pleasure to know both of these authors. And one of them is from my hometown of Carlsbad, California, and that is novelist Tanya Brooking, who wrote Lovely Rita, and which is her first novel. And then we also have Claire Eisenthal, who's from Carmel, Indiana, and so they're both joining us, from Tanya from Carlsbad and Claire from Carmel. So Tanya and Claire, welcome to the show.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with my first, the 2 pages that I selected to read to this lovely group. And before I do, I just want to make sure that I let the audience know that there is a trigger warning with heavy gun violence and trauma. So just a forewarning on that. Okay. The shots weren't stopping. They were gaining speed. A blur of bodies enclosed them, trapping them into a herd of stalked wildebeest. Nate's hand was all that grounded Flynn to this earth. 2 young boys stood in the center of the stampede's path, separated from their parents in the madness. Wearing matching green line t-shirts, they clutched each other, sobbing, faces swollen. Nate let go of her, swooping down to pick up the children. Stumbling, she reached for him. Nate, don't let go. The frantic crowd, a wild and raging river, ripped them apart. Flynn, stay right behind me. The distance between them grew. The machine gun's tightly packed bursts unloaded behind them. Her eyes locked onto Nate's. His pupils dilated, expanding into large black pools, reflecting her terror. Neck straining, Flynn opened her mouth to scream. Her throat constricted, unable to produce sound. Arms clasped around the boys, Nate struggled toward the only possible escape. Flynn! Slipping further away, she tried to stay close, unable to extract herself from the flow of tangled limbs. Nate! A blast masked her voice. Agony-filled screams collided with ringing ammunition fire. Endless rounds drummed against her ears, pounding them with mounting pressure. Diving sideways, she scrambled behind an abandoned concession stand. Chest heaving, the world spun like it was propelled from orbit. Involuntary tears streamed down her face, catching on her lips. Bitter saltiness mingled with acidic bile rising in her throat. A popcorn machine shattered on the counter of her concession stand bunker. Glass shards cascaded over her shoulders, slicing her arms. A crisscross pattern of blood rose to the surface. She flattened her back against the counter, breath caught within clenched jaws. A thick, putrid cloud burned her nostrils, searing her eyes. Head pressed between her knees, her fingers fastened over her neck. It's over. I'll never live through this. Just let it end quickly. Several seconds passed before Flynn realized the gunfire had stopped. Glancing up from her lap, her heart thudded into her stomach. A pair of heavy black boots stood before her. Hands numb, her mind struggled to grasp its new reality. Her gaze crept upward, over the black belted cargo pants and bulletproof vest to the crimson mask. Slowly, he raised his gun to her head. I'm gonna die, she thought. The towering figure studied her, unreadable beneath his costumed facade. Staring into the endless barrel, one last whisper fell from her lips. Goodbye. Pain ripped through her skull. Everything went black.
That
Wow.
is powerful and very suspenseful, I have to say. That was so.
And that's a reading from Claire Eisenthal's new book, The Rising Order.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, Claire, welcome to Front Page Pass.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you
We're
for
glad
coming.
to have you.
Yeah.
So.
So first of all, The Rising Order is quite a book. I mean, first, it really parallels a big troubling thing that's going on in this country. Could you start by elaborating on that?
Yeah, I think that scene that I just read is a good example of that. And it's so interesting because it obviously, as you might have picked up on, it takes place at a concert. And so I wrote this scene back well before the Ariana Grande concert terrorist attack, which occurred in Manchester in England back in 2017. And Tanya is my witness for that. She read it. She read it well in advance. So I'll never forget when that concert attack happened, because it was so similar to this scene. And a lot of what I wrote is actually reminiscent of my own experience. Of course, not being there, but back in 2011, I was actually at the Sugarland concert at the Indianapolis State Fair. And I'm not sure if you remember, but there was really horrible weather, and the stage at the Sugarland concert collapsed, killing, I think it was 8 people. And so I was there. And so a lot of those memories are very much from that, from the chaos, from the stampeding people, from the panic. So I kind of channeled that, as well as, just like some of those indelible moments from that memory of my own. So I mean, as we know, our world has become an increasingly scary place to live. And even just yesterday with Robert Aaron Long killing, I think 8, what was it? He shot a dozen Asian Americans, killing 8. So it's just, I don't want to say it's becoming normalized, but it's just sad to see what's happened, even in just me writing that scene and where we are now in our country.
And while Claire is talking, joining us on the podcast is her sister in writing, I like to think, Tanya Brooking, who's joining us from California.
Yes.
And so we're going to be talking to both of them together, and then also talking to each of them separately as the show goes on. So Claire, I mean, The Rising Order is a really striking story, because you not only have a memorable protagonist, but you have a memorable antagonist. Could you talk a little bit about, your protagonist and your antagonist, but also what what makes an antagonist compelling reading?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question.
Yeah, I was going to ask something similar to that, just kind of detail by fleshing out the antagonist is as important as the protagonist, really.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And it's so funny. Cause Tanya is also, Tanya and I, what Bob means by that is we've been in a writer's group for like, probably about 4 years now, Tanya. So Tanya's really seen the evolution of this book and the story and these characters, which is really special. I think there's a special relationship with that. But, to that point in that question, Wolf, who is the antagonist, actually came a lot easier to me, as Tanya knows. And people, they didn't connect with him more, but they were drawn in by him, I think, and by his voice. I don't know if that's because he's so different than who I am. If it's because during the creative process, it was kind of easier for me to channel that darkness, especially given so much of my anxieties about the world that we lived in were kind of emulated through him. But with Flynn, it was harder. And I think it was because she was more of a reflection of, a woman similar in age to myself, who was also very different, but also similar to me. So Wolf was easier for me to write, surprisingly. And I did a lot of research as well by working with people who had since been a part of domestic terrorist organizations as well, kind of vetting his character to make sure it was an accurate portrayal, as well as the organization was accurate of like what the organization that I created was. So
motives and etc.
Yeah.
Before we knew what Proud Boys were.
Before we knew what Proud Boys were, before domestic terrorism was really something that was discussed in the media like it is today. I had actually worked, and the person who I interviewed was Christian Piccolini, who he's written his own book that's been published, and he was very much a part of a neo-Nazi skinhead organization that he has since left, and he's appeared on 60 Minutes, and he's definitely been in the news quite often because he formed a nonprofit organization which is focused on extracting extremists from their organizations and reassimilating them back into society. And so he was a really critical person for me. He was a sounding board, in which I was able to kind of say, like, is this, I'd actually written the story, and then I bounced a lot of what Wolf's experience was off of him.
Okay.
And so was able to kind of validate and verify that, like, this is correct. And the relationship between him and Flynn as it unfolds, that would be realistic.
Yeah, that really helps with authenticity too, whenever you're creating an antagonist. So that's excellent.
I have one more question, and then I know Alexa's got a bunch for you. So the two of you have been in a writing group together for 4 years. And Tanya, when you first started seeing Claire's work, getting to know her, looking at her writing and stuff, what struck you about her writing? And secondly, how do you two collaborate when you're working on manuscripts? Because I know you pass chapters back and forth and so forth, but could you tell us a little bit about your collaboration process? And also, again, Tanya, what struck you about Claire's writing when you first saw it?
Well, it
make
really
it good, Tanya. Make it
good. It was really partly her as a person. We met at San Diego Writers Conference, and we just happened to be sitting together in the same workshop, I guess. I can't remember even who it was. And she had already a fully fleshed out manuscript, and she was like 27 or so, right?
Yeah.
And I was still, I might have had, I don't know, 150 pages written, 100 of which are no longer in my manuscript at all. And so I loved her, her tenacity, and she was so driven to get her story published and told, really, more importantly, told. And like she said, back then, domestic terrorism wasn't on, they didn't even say the words on the news or politics or whatever. So then when I read the story, which has drastically changed since then, including her protagonist, who went through a complete overhaul. Yeah, her protagonist, Flynn, was a very different character before. And when she changed that character, she became so much more interesting and fully fleshed out and complicated than and just realistic than the first round. But as far as working together as a writers group, so it's very unusual, I think, for you to have a writers group full of writers that all write in such different genres. Like, I'm women's fiction, she's a thriller. Our other writing partner writes sci-fi, of all things, and he's like a 70-year-old man in the woods in Wisconsin.
Oh, wow.
You're spread out.
Yeah, we're really spread out. Well, thank goodness for the writers conference, because I met him there, and he and I had actually started working together before I brought Claire in. I invited Claire to join us, and it was like 3 or 4 months after the conference, right, Claire?
Yeah. Yeah. At least maybe probably around then.
And she stuck with me. Her, like a good character, she stuck with me. And so when I invited her in, our group dynamic improved so much, because I think what we lend to each other, yes, we do trade chapters back and forth, and we do comments, and then we meet and go over the comments that we've made for each other. We all have our own ways of going forward after that. I'm very stubborn about certain things, but I'm super open about I'll just hang on to one thing because I don't know how to fix it. And I think that what I have is the only way to do it, until Claire and Bill say, well, what about this? What about that? And until somebody turns a light on for me, I just stay, I'm like a single-minded about it. So I don't know how people do it without a writer's group. I honestly don't. So we lend each other, I think if I were to say what our strengths were that we share with each other, Claire's, obviously, her action and tension are super, super powerful. She did create a villain who was complicated, who had a really intriguing backstory that she reveals over time through the book. And so the action and tension, and then a really good villain. And then Bill, our other partner, he is so incredibly good at choreography and dialogue. These are things that I've learned from them that have strengthened my writing so much. And I guess if I had a strength, I don't know, it's very hard to talk about myself. So I'm sure Claire could, I don't know.
Well, we'll talk about you.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We got it. We'll take care of that.
I know, ask me a question and I will always put it back on there.
So, Claire, could you give us kind of a quick overview of The Rising Order? And also, I know that this is the first book in what is being planned out as a trilogy. So can you just take us through the first book a little bit more, and then just kind of hint at what happens next?
Yeah, sure. So in a nutshell, The Rising Order is a story, like we've talked about domestic terrorism and the rise of domestic terrorism, hence the name. And it's about a young woman who is fairly lost in what she wants to do, but she works for a very large computing company. And she's taken hostage during a terrorist attack. And that organization who takes her hostage uses her to infiltrate her computing company. So I'll kind of leave it at that. But it is intended to be a series, and the next installment is very different in feel, because it's a little bit more apocalyptic. It reflects kind of like the worst case scenario about essentially how ill prepared our country is for cyber warfare and for cyber attacks, especially by agents who really have nothing to lose. So that's been an interesting study, and different scenarios that, of course, I've been playing out in my head as the series has evolved. But yeah, it
sounds interesting. Yeah. So the sequel will essentially be kind of a portrayal of if the domestic terrorists have their way, so to speak.
Exactly. And we kind of see that evolution throughout the first book, as well as we learn more about the organization, why they are the way they are, their motives, their manifesto, what they want to achieve. And then the second book is what happens when they achieve it. So, you know, it's kind of the
intense, yeah.
And again, the news follows what Claire writes. So be very careful about what you write, Claire.
I know.
Yeah,
seriously. I know. It's like I wrote about insurrection before insurrection was a thing on January 6th.
Oh gosh.
So.
Yeah, you forecasted in a way in your manuscript. And then you also, another thing about your background too is you do work for a large company in the industry. So how does your work experience, how did that bleed into the book, or did it?
It definitely bled into the book. You know, I work I work in sales as an account executive at Google. And so seeing the power that these large tech companies have, especially in terms of the data that they have at their disposal, you can see how vulnerable it makes the general population in terms of how much now we rely on technology. You know, on the ability for things like 0-day viruses to take advantage of the vulnerabilities that are often in the systems. And, you know, how even those vulnerabilities can be capitalized on by our own American government, which has been something really interesting to learn about and read about in the research that I did when coming up, you know, with some of the plot lines of the book. So you just have access to a lot of information and a lot of players being in the tech industry, and you know, a lot of worst case scenarios. Just I'm a worst case scenario kind of gal clearly, and that kind of my work. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I should just say that both The Rising Order and Lovely Rita, Tanya's book, are currently being marketed in the publishing world. So there's several editors in New York looking at each of their manuscripts right now. So it's kind of been an extended pins and needles time for both of them.
Yeah, true.
But to that point, a quick question for both of you. A lot of writers, new writers, or young writers, think that really you write your first draft, you rewrite it, you're done. Could you each talk about what effort it took to get your manuscripts to the point at which they went out to publishers?
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Tanya, you want to go first?
Handed it to you.
We've both come I mean, thinking about the past few years and like where we were and where we are now, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. We both rewrote our entire manuscripts.
Yeah.
100% from beginning to end. And then rewrote them again. And then revised. And then in preparation for this meeting today, we both had to open up our manuscripts, which we have been pretty good about not doing.
Right.
How dangerous that is. And as I looked for a couple of pages to read, every 2 pages I read, I had to start wordsmithing. So it's never done, right? I was on a webinar with Lily King, the author of Writers and Lovers, and she said when it starts being quiet, when it's, you know, when the story stops talking to you, then you're done. And I'm like, when does that ever happen?
When does the story stop?
And Claire writing a sequel, she has no choice but to reference her
that door open
first manuscript. And mine is, though my current work in progress is a spin-off of Lovely Rita, so I am still also in that world. So it's very long.
Yeah, it's
way longer than anticipated.
It's such a, like, I think when you try to establish an end goal with the story and the writing is when I just don't think that's possible anymore. Or you'll constantly be disappointed or exasperated or impatient, because you just, to Tanya's point, you don't ever quite get there. Especially with the constant revisions. And like Tanya said, when we were both kind of looking through our manuscripts, trying to figure out what to read, like I didn't even want to do it. I was like, I can't even I can't even bring myself to open up this manuscript again right now. Now it was really fun. It was really fun to kind of go through and try to find, a great scene to read, in which sometimes you're able to fall in love with your writing all over again. Sometimes you just, it's so cringeworthy. Love-hate relationship. But
well,
we
it's
are
one
our own
thing
worst
to
critic.
read it to yourself. It's another thing to go, okay, I got to read this out loud.
I know, it's such a different exercise, and it's important that this is when it's important to have another partner like Tanya, where it's like, you being your own worst critic, like it's good to sometimes have somebody else who can kind of talk you off the ledge, where you're like, this is crap.
When you're stuck in one scene for a month and you're like, what? Why is this one taking a month when another one could take 2 days?
Right. Yeah.
Which Bob, you've written enough books, so exactly.
I know it's voices. I rewrote it twice, and then I got into a time thing where after my first rewrite, I had a political subthread going on in there that had to come out because I had put the book away. And so I had to redo that whole thing, but yeah, it always takes it just, and it never ends. Like you have both said, it just, the voice just doesn't want to shut off. But sometimes you just have to hit send. And then you've had the same experience with your novel.
I have, yes, pretty much. So I mean, like she said, it's kind of a love-hate relationship by the time you get finished with it, which you never really do get finished. And even honestly, after you get it published, I mean, I've heard of, pretty prominent authors that say they still want to go back and they wish they could go back and, rewrite the thing. So,
well, I know, because I remember when in New York about 15 years ago or so, I went to a Joyce Carol Oates signing and I was talking to her, and she's one of the most prolific authors of the last century.
Yeah, exactly.
And she was redoing her entire first collection of short stories that she'd originally published in 1964. So here it is 40 years later, and she's redoing them because they didn't sound right to her.
Exactly. Yeah.
But then again, you think about it, she's a much better writer than she was 40 years ago. She's
Very
40
true.
years older, so a lot more life experience. Yeah,
experience comes into play as well, because I wrote a World War II nonfiction that I'm now currently, revamping totally. And it was something that I wrote 7 or 8 years ago. And now, reading it now, it's like, oh gosh, what was I doing then? But so, your writing evolves as you evolve, put it that way.
What do you love most about writing, Claire?
Oh gosh. I just think it's such an outlet. I just think it's such an important part of myself and who I am. And I genuinely believe in my heart of hearts that this is my calling. This is what I'm meant to do. And, I was speaking to another published author the other day and kind of asking her, Bob, as you said, being on submission right now and having your manuscript on the desk of editors, it's just it's been really tough on me, because as the more time passes, the more you kind of begin to doubt yourself and your work. And I was talking to her about it, given she'd gone through something like that. And I was like, writing, my second book for, of a series, I don't even know if the first one will sell. Like, I'm kind of paralyzed by that. And she was like, this is where you have to ask yourself in your heart of hearts, like, is this the story you're supposed to tell? Because that's the only thing that will really stick with you, especially because all of these external factors in the publishing industry are so far out of your control. And I think that's true of this story for me. I think without a doubt, this is something that I have to tell. And, it's just getting lost in that flow of writing is the best. There's nothing better than that. So I would say that's it for me. That's my favorite part, is when you're just lost in the story and you're lost in the characters and they speak to you constantly, and you realize how they're a part of you, you're a part of them, and you can create this world with them at the center of it.
And for any writer out there, it's best to, to just not let yourself get discouraged and to really reflect on those moments that you're talking about when you can totally get lost in your manuscript and lost in those characters. It's good to, just kind of get to center yourself and really reflect on that, why you started writing in the first place, and not let that whole process of getting a book published discourage you. Because when you do get it published, it's, in retrospect, you look back and you think it was all worth it, so.
Yeah. Yep. All part of the journey.
Yeah.
Yep.
So on that note, we're gonna switch from a gritty thriller with domestic terrorism undertones.
Yep.
We're gonna go to the beach now. Yay!
Going on a little vacation.
Yeah,
So.
and Tanya's joining us from Carlsbad, California, which of course is my hometown. Anyway, so Tanya, give us a quick overview of Lovely Rita and why you decided to write the book.
It's so hard. I'm so bad at an elevator pitch. I almost asked Claire to tell them what the book is about. She does it as well as I do. So the story kind of sprouted from a short story that I had written. I went into a creative writing class, and after my mom died, I wanted to get back to, I had always been a writer, but I wanted to get back into it. I hadn't been writing for a long time. And so I wrote this short story that became one of the chapters in Lovely Rita. I had no idea what it was going to be about, but once I wrote the short story, it just kind of stuck with me for years, like 6 years. And then all of a sudden it just started to grow legs. And so I started writing backstory. I didn't realize it was backstory, but and I started writing poems and lyrics and things like that. And it all just kind of coalesced into this full-fledged novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned writing lyrics and stuff, because I was going to ask you to kind of discuss you having to tap into any songwriting abilities, because I know that the main character does delve into that quite often. So I didn't know if you had a musical background, or if it was something you had to work on, or if the lyrics came first, prior to the book itself, or
No, so I have no musical abilities whatsoever. I took piano as a child, like most children.
Yes.
I'm completely tone deaf. Anybody that's heard me sing knows that they would never want to do that again. But I've always written poetry that's not really poetic, I guess, is what I don't know how else to say it, because it's not like rhyming. It's, I guess, free form is what they call it.
Okay, yeah, exactly.
Free verse.
I didn't know that at the time. Yeah, free verse. Thank you.
Interesting.
So the songs that Rita writes during the writing of the novel, the songs that she writes are really only bits and pieces of verse, a verse here, a rhyme there. She kind of thinks in terms of rhyming.
Yes.
And when she's pissed off or hurt, she goes to that place to it's almost like a meditation for her. And anybody that's meditated to music will that'll jive with them. And then I did write her song, of course. That is the song at the I don't want to give anything away, but there's a song that is
the central song. Yes,
there you go.
It's written. I haven't written music to it. I don't know how to do that, but she's a lyricist anyway, so and she doesn't have any musical background either, so I guess that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, so that makes sense.
Yeah, she's just a natural. That's what that's her go-to.
Yeah, that's interesting how you were able to just pull out bits and pieces of lyrics, or bits and pieces of songs in her character, and pull that off. Because I know with voices, I had to do it the hard way. I ended up writing 30 songs in each of my 2 protagonist voices. Wow. 60 songs, and then pulling 10 or 12 that ended up being in the book, because I just couldn't do that like you did it. You did it the easy, or not the easy way, but you did it the really direct way, where you were able to grab it right in the moment. And I know my experience was a little tougher than that. But
if you've read Daisy Jones and the Six, which came out long after I wrote this story, obviously, but she Taylor Jenkins Reid, the author, she obviously wrote all those songs, and then at the back of the book she's got all the songs printed, so you can, because you don't get to hear them while you're reading the book, you don't even get to see them in their entirety in the book, just little snippets. And the feel of each song is so integral to the story. And so is Rita's featured song.
That's an interesting approach.
Right.
Yeah.
So a question for both of you. So you write in such totally different genres. Your styles are much different. Um, when you're looking at each other's writing and and just so what do you two have? What do you feel you have in common as writers? And what are you able to point out in the other's writing that works so well for you as a collaborative team?
Hmm. Go ahead, Claire.
Um, I mean, it's so funny because, when Tanya, I feel like we know each other's work so well now. We know each other's voices. We know each other's weaknesses, our strengths. So, oh, I, Tanya, I take probably like 98% of your recommendations whenever I send you a chapter and you send me back comments and revisions, I want to
Yeah.
say. Maybe it's a little bit more. Sometimes it's 100%. But I just really trust Tanya. I trust that she always honors my voice and honors the story. And so her suggestions are really just ways to make it stronger and to bring forward what might not be on the page. So I think we're good at identifying that for each other, because there really comes to be a point in time when you can't really notice that about your own work anymore.
True.
And so I think we're really good about pointing that out. Tanya, I'd love to get your take on this, but I would say she would say about me that I'm very, very good with structure for her. And
Yes.
one area where, I mean, she's so great about, about description and then dialogue. Like, she has been so critical in helping me stick to the character's voice for dialogue, and I know that everyone says like, oh, your first dialogue's always like your first draft, especially when you get it down on the page, but she kind of helps like bring that character to life by making sure the dialogue matches that voice of the character.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Tanya, I don't know what you'd say.
Personality
think
really
that's-
shines through.
It's so important. And I'm in another writers group with all women's fiction, and it's so important to honor the other author's voice and to, everything that we suggest for each other are just that, suggestions. But Claire and I have worked together so long that I too also take 98 to 100% of her suggestions. I think structure wise, especially because this novel writing thing is such a huge beast. Yeah. And I had no idea, because all I had ever written was, little short stories and poems. I'm like, oh, how hard.
That's quite a jump.
So she's really helped me move things around within a scene, and also just overall, not the whole manuscript. Sometimes things just needed to be moved around to make more sense. She mentioned about writing dialogue, as a lot of people do that as their first draft, just write all dialogue to get it out. And I don't do that. And I end up with a lot of narrative that can be changed to dialogue. But sometimes I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And that is where a lot of my extra work comes in the revisions, is finding those the right points to turn into dialogue, because like Claire said, it's so it's so hard to see in your own work.
Yeah, and another question I have for you about Lovely Rita. One of the things that was really captivating and striking to me about the book when I read it is it's set in Southern California. It's a teenage girl for the most part that then grows up. I won't give away the end, but so it's Southern California, teenage girl, 1970s. Now, I was a teenage boy in Southern California in the 1970s, and it was party time, fun time. I mean, every great feeling, positive vibe you could have, that's how it was. I mean, it was awesome. But your book isn't that way. It's really interesting how it's gritty and it's very serious in places, and it's a tough book. And it's kind of like the anti-beach read. And could you, because I know when you were pitching publishers, initial response was, yeah, we're looking for beach read, Southern California. We're really looking for Southern California. And then, but it's not quite that. Could you describe the tone of the book a little bit?
I think they're surprised when they get this story, when they're looking for a Southern California quote unquote, because it's set at the beach, and it is the anti-beach read, but it is dark. I think it's the darkness is juxtaposed with the beauty of this place, which I really tried. I didn't really try to bring it forward. It just came forward, to be honest. This is where I live, and when my inspiration is the beach. So even when I would get a block of writing, a writing block, I would take my notebook across the street and go to the beach and walk on the sand. And I mean, everything is right there. Everything that's there that I saw, pretty much everything landed in the book, because one thing doesn't change about it, and that's the beach, whether it's the 70s or today, except for the leaves falling and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Lack of sand that we used to have so much of, but overall, the smell, the sounds, the things that you see are all, the feel on your skin, all of that is still very much the same. And it was easy. And as far as writing goes, nothing's easy in writing, but as far comparative to a lot of other parts, the hard stuff, that was easy.
Yeah.
The hard stuff's hard. There's no question. Getting
You
into
do that so well, Tanya. You just.
But I didn't at first.
It was always there, though. It was always there.
It's here.
Like reel it back in almost, because it was sometimes the sense of place was so powerful. Sometimes it kind of took over the story a little bit.
Yeah. And the dark things, I thought I needed so much more dark. There's actually a lot of dark stuff that happened in the initial draft that's not there anymore.
Oh, wow.
And partly that was Bill, our other writing partner, kept saying, she's going to have a happy ending, right? Like, when does anything good happen to this girl? I'm like, this isn't that kind of story, Bill. And then finally it rang true to me. I'm like, oh, well, that happened already, and this is just a worse version of that. Maybe she needs a little triumph at this point. And it really, I think that helped the ebb and flow of the story for a reader, because I didn't realize how dark it had gotten. Because again, you don't see what's on the page, you just hear what's in your head most of the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to ask you if this was kind of more to you a redemptive tale. I mean, obviously it's about the main character's, harrowing journey and whatnot, but if it was more of a redemptive tale, like I said,
Yeah, no, it was pretty much a tragedy. Yeah. And
a lot of authors do go that route, so
I like it so much better. It makes me so happy. I cried at the end. I still cry at the end when I read.
Yeah.
Because it was unexpected. It's unexpected to me, which I guess is really when you talk about what's the most joy in writing, I think that is what it is for me, is the surprises that come that I don't plan, that the characters tell me, or my writing partners tell me, but the characters tell me, this is the direction we're going. And sometimes they lead me to a dead end, to be honest. And I have to, reel back and go, okay, well, where did we get off track? But that's my favorite thing, is being surprised by the characters, for sure.
So that leads to a follow-up for each of you. What was the most surprising thing that came to you when you were writing that ended up in the book? So what is in the book that you wrote that you never had any idea you would write, and it just came to you in the middle of working on the book, each of you?
Well, I think for me, it was the first and last chapters.
Yeah.
It changed everything about my book. I did not have that first and last chapter. Because I didn't have the redemption component, and it was just kind of a downward spiral the whole time. I didn't have the bookends to prop it up. And once I got those, I went back in and changed so much in the middle to put her on that path.
Okay.
Yeah. And it sounds like a lot of work, and I guess it was, but when I look back, I guess it's kind of like having a baby. Now I got the great baby. I don't really think so much about how hard it was pushing it out.
Now, Claire might have a more recent memory of pushing out.
Yeah, like still fresh. Let's see. I don't know. Honestly, for me, I would say because I actually had a very clear vision when I first started writing the book of the last chapter. Like I wrote the last chapter freehand because I knew what was, I just could see it so vividly in my mind. I almost kind of worked backwards throughout, like, forward and backward. And as Tanya knows, I had to restructure a lot, as the different, as I rewrote the different drafts. I mean, how it started and how it ends is very different. But so I would almost say I was most surprised by like the second book and where it went and the direction it went and the direction of the characters and the growth of the characters as I've continued to learn more about them and get to know them more. They've kept me surprised throughout that process. So it kind of carries more into the second book as their evolution has become more and more clear to me.
Yeah, okay. I can see that. Flynn's character arc in particular. Is that much? It's like it was a surprise for me to read, which is great.
And I've loved writing it. I've loved writing the second book in a way that I actually didn't really feel with the first. Maybe it was because I was learning so much. I was basically learning how to write a novel when I wrote the first. It was the first book that I started and finished. And the second book has just come alive in a different way.
Awesome. Well, this sounds just like the actual writing experience when we're immersed in writing, but the last 5 minutes, we've only been on for 5 minutes, but the clock says we're out of time.
I know. How does that happen?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, darn, I have to read.
Well, thank you so much to Claire Eisenthal, author of The Rising Order, and Tanya Brooking, the author of Lovely Rita. And Tanya's going to take us out of this episode with a couple of pages from Lovely Rita.
Yep.
All yours, Tanya.
Okay.
Looking forward to it.
So this happens when Rita and her mother have fled their home in the middle of the night. I just need to give a little context in order to escape Rita's stepfather. Even in the dark, the Mirage Motel seemed a place only the most desperate would stay. The adobe building had been painted the color of fatigues. It looked depressed, as if it had survived a great war, but left behind a vital limb. Rita's heart sank. We're staying here? You got a better idea? Mama killed the engine and stepped out. Be right back. But no whining. It's only temporary. She slammed the door. Rita plunked the locks down. Inside, Mama tapped a bell. A chubby bald man appeared in frayed robe, rubbing saggy eyes. He pushed a book across the desk, which Mama scribbled in before dropping some bills on his desk. She returned and sank back into the driver's seat, dangling a key from her finger. Lucky number 7, her fake cheer didn't reach her eyes. Lucky, Rita thought. Yucky, mucky, plucky fuckery. Around back, they parked behind an ashen door. Here it is, number 7. Mama's tight smile faltered. Home sweet home. Hoisting her belongings from the hatch, Rita swallowed sharp nostalgia for their beloved bungalow with its lush willow tree. She forced a smile and said, "This is good, Mama, like a do-over." "See, I knew you'd be happy. We just needed a change of scenery." Mama slid the key into a jiggly knob and leaned into the door. It creaked open to a dank room that reeked of dirty mattresses and mold you could taste like a rotten tooth. Rita tapped a switch. An overhead light bulb sparked to life behind a cobwebby glass disc. A double bed, blanketed in a dusty, indistinct pattern, shared the room with a table and chair, a small TV, and a low bank of drawers. Her fragile hope withered. Mama yanked a bottle of wine and opener from her purse. "Well, this'll be different." Wishing her mother's demeanor invited a warm embrace, Rita laced her arms around her own ribs and squeezed. With the most confidence she could muster, she repeated Mama's implied promise. "It's only temporary."
Wow, that's really poetically descriptive. I mean, that's well done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like that.
I miss it. I miss reading those pages, Tanya.
We need to get back to that.
I know.
I need help. I need so much help.
I know.
Well, thank you both so very much for joining us today. This has been wonderful, and we look forward to seeing both of these books on the bookshelves very soon.
Yep.
Thanks again for having us. It was so much fun.
Yes, it was.
Thanks for coming on. We enjoyed it. Certainly.
Love it. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us at Front Page Pass, where we present everything from new titles to rocking interviews with best-selling authors and publishing experts, writing and editing tips, the latest on the bookshelves for readers, and live coverage of writers' festivals, conferences, and author signings. Our mission: to serve up the world in a thrilling, wonderful, and most adventurous new way.